But the idea is that that's what keeps people away from playing games, is if they can't think the way that the developer wants them to think, then they don't want to play the game. Hi there, welcome to Games Over Coffee Consulting. People give me their games, I give feedback on their game design. My name is Devon, and today we're talking about Blade of the Fallen by Razby. This game from the outset looks very, very simple. If you see in the gameplay here, it's just one space of a bunch of enemies and you just kill them, wave after wave. This game doesn't look that interesting. I'm not trying to be mean here. It doesn't look that interesting, but it plays really, really well. I really like this game. I think it's really interesting, and I got hooked on it. This game still exists in kind of an early stage, so it makes sense that it's not like fully realized right now. There's not a whole lot of depth to the overall gameplay, but as far as the basic mechanics are concerned, and as far as the things that you can just do in the game, which is not that much, it feels still really good to play. So how the levels are played are just waves. There's waves of enemies that come in, but you get upgrades as you complete each wave. So in a way, it kind of feels like Vampire Survivors, not too much. It's not the same at all, but it just reminds me of it for some reason. So when developers submit their game, in the questionnaire that they fill out, I ask them, is there any specific part that you want me to look at? And this person said that I could stop anywhere between wave 8 and 9 or 12 to 18. There's no limit, but the content stops at around 6 or 7. And I played till like wave 22 or 23. I really liked the gameplay. I thought it was really cool. This is, I think, the second time now that I've gone into a game that feels like I have a strong bias when I play it. This happened last time with VidVad Games when he submitted Goliath Depot. When I played that game, I felt like it was exactly my skill set, and so I felt like my advice was very biased. But this is fun and this is interesting to me because I like trying to analyze exactly why I felt a certain way about a game. So I always ask the developer what kind of experience they want. This person said, the player is supposed to experience a mix between adrenaline, mastery, and mindless attacking. It should be suitable for both casuals and hardcore gamers. The game should make you feel empowered, although if I have the option, I would also like to make the player feel tiny, like they're fighting a really hard challenge without it actually being that hard to beat and being accessible to new players. That's really great. That actually reminds me of, what is it, Dynasty Warriors or Samurai Warriors, whatever that game is. This person also says, I tried listening to player feedback as much as possible. Wave 1 being too aggressive made some players not get past it and got demotivated immediately from continuing. However, everyone who got past wave 2 was also super likely to beat the game. That is super interesting stuff, and that's actually exactly why you should playtest your game, right? That obviously this person did, but if you're a developer who's looking to try to figure out certain issues in your game, playtesting will show you that kind of analysis, and you'll be able to understand more of what motivates the player or demotivates them. The first thing I want to talk about is mastery, the idea of the mechanics and using the mechanics in a way that makes you feel like they're a part of you. So a lot of times, twitchy action games, the kind of games that I really like, for me, works because my brain works in that way. Like strategic games I hate, slow games I hate, but mostly I'm very drawn to arcade-like games. Very hot right now. It's 91 degrees right now. October 6th, and it's 91 degrees. What the? Dark Souls is a game that I hate. And I cannot play it. I have such a hard time using my own intuitive thinking to play Dark Souls because Dark Souls is not really a twitchy-like game. When I play Dark Souls, I have this kind of twitchy-like mindset, but I play it and it slows me down and it feels really clunky and weird. And so when I'm playing it, it doesn't work for me, right? My intuitive mindset, the mindset that I'm using, does not mix with the way that Dark Souls is designed. So that being the case, think about people who play this game and what your intended audience is, because the idea about broadening an audience is that you need to appeal to a lot of different people. I know you said you wanted both casual and hardcore gamers, but what I'm saying is that if you want your audience to be pretty broad, that you'll have to make them understand how to play the game. And I don't mean that as a tutorial. This is why I find game design so interesting. So this is kind of just game design theory, I guess, because I can't really find this on the internet anywhere. And the idea is that we can use game design to obviously teach the player how to play the game, but we can also use game design to teach the player how to think about the game. If you look at this previous video that I did, there was a specific way that I was thinking about a strategy game that I was playing, or a tactical game. I had this, this action intuitive mindset, the mindset that I'm using toward most of the games that I play. I can't do it when I'm playing a tactical game because I have to change the way I'm thinking. In that way, I described a tutorial that person could do in order to make me think in the tactical way. If you want to introduce your game to people who are not intuitively thinking the way that your game works, then you're going to have to teach them how to think. And the way that you do this with action games is by incremental challenges, or stair-stepping. You have to think about your game kind of like a puzzle. If you look at this video that I did in my other channel, so I talked about how The witness teaches the player how to work through a certain puzzle. When you're doing that puzzle, you don't know what you're doing except from what was already taught to you, but it does it through very small steps and lets the player figure it out themselves. And of course, that's what the magic is about a game like The Witness or like any game that has to do with interactive teaching, is that when the player is teaching themselves stuff, then they're getting engaged with the game and they can have fun with it, right? They can actually get into the game process and start thinking the way that the developer wants them to think. That's one of the reasons why these really complex like board games and card games are a turnoff for a lot of players who play video games, because there's not a whole lot of games out there that teach themselves through gameplay. Now there are some, I'm pretty sure Magic has some sort of thing like that too. But the idea is that that's what keeps people away from playing games, is if they can't think the way that the developer wants them to think, then they don't want to play the game. So with that in mind, let's think about this thing that the developer said. He said, I tried listening to player feedback as much as possible. Wave 1 being too aggressive made some players not get past it and demotivated them immediately from continuing. So what is it exactly that the players are getting demotivated by when they get into wave 1? The developer said it was too aggressive, but what does that mean? Does the player not understand something? Does the player find the game too hard? What exactly is it that's causing them friction? Obviously, I can only see this from my perspective, so I'm going to try to analyze what I think is happening. This is my opinion. When newcomers first play this game, okay, the first thing that happens in this game, you come to this screen where it's just you and one bat. Right, there's a bat in front of you. So the player goes over and it shows you how to attack. This is perfect. This is so good for showing the player exactly what to do. You have an enemy that does not do anything, and they just sit there until the player attacks them. They can't go forward, they can't do anything else until they attack that bat. So I think that's really good. So they do that, attack the bat and it dies. So that teaches the player a few things. 1, how to attack. 2, that enemies have health bars that you need to lower until they die. The second one is shadow stepping, and shadow stepping is a dodge basically. The shadow step or the dodge allows you to go onto the other side of the enemy without getting hurt by them. The only thing that's being taught right here is 1, how to do the mechanic, but 2, how to think about the mechanic and how to use it. Now this is really good. However, it has a caveat, and we'll talk about that in a second. So you use it against the skeleton that does not attack, which is awesome. The skeleton just puts up a shield, and you go behind him, attack him, then we see a little bar fill up, and then he switches sides. Then you go on the other side, attack him, and you keep doing that until he dies. Now the game starts. And this is, I think, where that caveat happens, because the next 2 enemies that you fight are bats again. However, these bats now have attack patterns, and they're different from the bats that the person fought in the beginning. So in the beginning, the bats were just sitting there, not doing anything. Now, the bats can do 2 things. They can bite, and they can do this rush attack. We're gonna take an aside really quick. Something that's really cool about this game is that all of the enemies in it, I think there's 5 or 6 different enemies, all have really good telegraphing. And if you don't know what telegraphing is, it's when an enemy shows that they're about to attack. So with that present, that's really good. However, let's go back to this bat here. When he starts to do his rush attack, he turns red and starts to back up a little bit, and then he rushes. So the thing that the player is learning now is that bats, 1, can attack, 2, they have 2 different attacks, and 3, they have different types of damage that can affect the player. So the rush attack can actually hurt the player, I think, 1/3 of their health bar. So if you get hurt 3 times from a rush attack, you're done for. That's game over. So what the player has to do in these instances are either retreat from the bat or go on the other side of it and attack it from that side. The way that I played the game, I would always shadow step around the bat, and slash it. But the players who don't intuitively think about the combat in this way aren't going to think about using shadow step in that specific way, because they haven't done that yet. The only way that they've thought about shadow stepping is to get on the other side of an enemy who's not attacking and then attack them because they can't attack them from the front. The bats, you can still attack from the front. There's no reason to get on the other side of them unless you know that the bat is going to rush forward, which you don't. So because the player doesn't know these things, it's just all dropped on them all at once. So speaking of telegraphing, when the bat turns red and starts to back up, that's a form of telegraphing, right? Well, the other telegraphing element that it has is this biting thing. But the bat is so tiny and his mouth is so small compared to everything else on the screen that it doesn't really look like he does anything when it bites you. There's no real telegraphing moment that looks any different from anything else happening on screen. So the player can get hurt pretty easily by just being next to the bat and then not understanding why they're getting hurt. I think what needs to be taught here is that the player needs to be taught how to use the dodge in a strategic kind of way. They were already taught one way. They were taught how to use the shadow step to get on the other side of an enemy. They were not taught, however, that they should use that when the enemy is attacking them. The way that I think would be a better way to do this would be to iterate yet again, have another skeleton, but this one swings its sword, and the player has to get out of the way from the swing of the sword, hit him from the other side. The reason why I think this would work is because the player has just used the shadow stepping on a skeleton already, and then they see that the skeleton attacks. When they use it, they're going to understand, oh, I can use the shadow step to dodge attacks also, and that will put me in an advantageous state. Because they know that now they can do things like dodge out of the way from bats who are flying at them. I think that's probably what's happening in the first part and what's causing our too aggressive things to happen. I think you can still keep the same kinds of enemies as long as you iterate that learning process just a little bit more. You can probably even add more steps, things that I can't think of right now. Do know that if you do have a lot of stair stepping, sometimes you can bore players that are more hardcore. That's just kind of the audience selection thing. You'll notice that not a whole lot of really hardcore players will play games that are intended for really broad audiences, and it's because they're just different audiences, right? If you try to broaden your audience to make sure anyone can play your game, you're going to have to alienate someone at some point, and that's fine. You know, just think about the audience that you want to appeal to and try to appeal to them. To really get both the hardcore and casual at the same time, it's difficult to find that balance, and it takes a lot of play testing, which I'm sure you're aware of and I'm sure you've done already. With that being said, this game is so great. I want to talk about the game design, just the way that it is, and basically use this as an example for those of you who are making your own games and trying to figure out how to build depth into your game. What's really cool about this game is there's only basically two things you can do, maybe three things. You have the shadow step, as we talked about. You have your slash. Oh, you actually have two more things. You have the moonlight cut, which is this kind of anime-ish thing. Then there's the deflecting. If there's a bomb or an arrow coming towards your character, you can deflect it by attacking that item. Those things I do feel like need to be taught more. I don't think they're in here yet, just because this is an early stage of the game. But yeah, I definitely would, teach those things. You only really have, those few little mechanics, but the gameplay is so deep. Each enemy in this game is different in a way that it makes the player approach them differently. So the bats, for example, like I said, have the rush attack and the bite attack. Each time that the player approaches the bat, they have to think differently about the way that they're strategizing their attack against the bat. If you go to a bat and you start attacking them while they're gearing up to rush at you, you're going to have to make a decision if you want to risk continuing to attack them because they might rush at you pretty quickly. Do you try to chase them forward as they're backing up, or do you retreat? Because as you retreat, then they'll stop glowing red. Do you attack them from a distance, or do you attack them really close and risk getting bitten? The skeletons are really good because the skeletons are the only ones that block, which makes the player have to think differently about the way that they attack the skeletons. There's two types of projectile enemies. One of them is a goblin that throws bombs, but he also has a knife that stabs you from really close. Do you attack him from a distance by deflecting his bombs? Do you use the bombs to attack other enemies? Or do you get really close to him and risk getting hit to try to slash him that way? The arrows. Do you wait for the arrows? The arrows come pretty quickly, so you're risking getting hit because your slash is a little bit delayed, so it's not immediate when you attack. You have to time it correctly in order to hit one of the arrows. Or do you risk getting closer to the archer who then runs away really quickly, thus making it harder for you to actually slash them? Do you use your sidestepping ability, which drains your energy, or do you save it for their moonlight cut? All of these things, they're so interesting when they're all interplaying together, and I think it's really, really good combat design. The game doesn't look super polished, and I want to reiterate that the game has really good art, but just as a whole, it just looks like one flat thing, but it feels really good to play, and I think that's really interesting, and I think that's a really good testament to your enemy design and to your combat design. I noticed, by the way, for the dev here, Rasby, when you filled out the questionnaire, you put in your comments that your goal is to develop this game, I think, about 1 more month or so. I would like to see much more stuff in this game, just because I think you have a really good thing here. Maybe providing it as DLC or something like that if you didn't want to put too much effort into something before you release it. I could understand that. I think this game is fun by itself. I would like to see this game developed out a lot more. I want to see more levels. I'd like to see more variants of bad guys or something like that. Some more variety in this game would be really cool. It's really good as it is right now, but as far as an experience, it's just a one-dimensional experience, which isn't terrible, but it is just, it's just combat. If you think about a game like Vampire Survivors, which is also just a one-dimensional experience, but you have a lot of that one-dimensional experience because you have different types of characters that each have their own bonuses, different enemies and different types of levels. I would love to see this game have a lot more content in it. I feel like it's a really interesting and fun game. So that's basically it. Thank you so much, Rasby, for submitting your game. If you are not this developer, please submit me a game. I have no more games to talk about right now. So submit a game. There's a link in the description, or you can go to gamesover.coffee. There's a little submit game button. All right, thank you so much for watching. I will catch you guys later.